seminario di siamo all'ultimo incontro di questo ciclo, che è davvero volato per l'interesse degli argomenti, per la qualità dei relatori e anche stellato da tante stranezze. Insomma, l'appuntamento del venerdì pomeriggio per me era un po' un'abitudine diventata. Mi mancherete quando appunto più. Abbiamo però la fortuna, d'altra parte, di avere oggi la professoressa Lorena Bachmaier che per ragioni del tutto personali ho particolare piacere di lei fatto epistolare via mail.
C'è un problema di connessione perché non ti si sente per parecchio.
Sì.
C'è un problema di connessione.
Non si sente.
È bloccato, mi sa.
Penso che adesso dovrebbe andare meglio. Dicevo appunto, per ragioni personali ho un rapporto risalente con la professoressa Bachmaier, perché da tempo ho avuto il piacere di conoscerla nel comune centro di ricerca di Friburgo, anche se il suo orizzonte sia scientifico sia di collaborazioni internazionali è davvero raro. Perché lei ha molto collaborato con il Consiglio d'Europa in una serie di missioni in moltissimi paesi centro-orientali europei. Lei si occupa di diritto processuale penale e in questo ruolo ha contribuito anche al capacity building di molte amministrazioni della giustizia in questi paesi, oltre che a pareri sui diversi codici di procedura penali e su leggi di procedura penale. Inoltre ha avuto delle importanti collaborazioni con un centro interdisciplinare di ricerca che ha sede a Friburgo, perché Friburgo non è soltanto sede di un centro internazionale di diritto penale internazionale comparato, oggi anche di sicurezza, come è stato rinominato, ma anche altre realtà di eccellenza. Sempre nel campo della serie degli istituti Max Planck c'è anche un istituto Max Planck a Friburgo per la immunobiologia, e poi c'è un Fraunhofer Institute che noi conosciamo poco, ma che è un modello per la ricerca post-universitaria nelle scienze non sociali, umanistiche, giuridiche ed economiche, nelle scienze che si chiamano in maniera molto difficile da accettare scienze dure. Diciamo che è difficile da accettare per noi perché saremmo di conseguenza appartenenti alle scienze molli, il che non è proprio gradevole. Ebbene, c'è anche appunto un centro avanzato di studi di scienze cognitive del cervello, dove appunto la professoressa Bachmaier ha vinto una importante fellowship che per oltre un anno l'ha resa edotta di questo mondo così affascinante delle neuroscienze in una dimensione realmente interdisciplinare. Ora purtroppo io manco da tanto da Friburgo e questa carrellata vi dà la misura della mia nostalgia di questi ambienti, ma mi fa davvero piacere che la professoressa Bachmaier abbia potuto partecipare ancora una volta a questo centro Jean Monnet. Lei è appunto una delle forze più qualificate del nostro team e quindi le do volentieri la parola. Ci presenterò poi gli altri importanti partecipanti a questa tavola, anzi non è una tavola, a questo workshop, questo seminario del centro Jean Monnet. man mano che li andrò presentando per introdurre i loro interventi. Siamo condizionati al fatto che, come avrete sentito nelle more di questa apertura ufficiale, la professoressa Bachmaier, per un imprevisto familiare, lei si trova a Friburgo, deve rientrare in Spagna e quindi ha trovato una soluzione che adesso vi presenterà lei stessa, e appunto già questa soluzione vi dice quanto sia versatile il suo modo di rapportarsi alle attività che ci accomunano. Prego Lorena, e grazie di essere con noi, sia pur in questa forma duplice. Prego.
Grazie professore, grazie Vincenzo, grazie cari amici. Per me è un piacere immenso. Il team di Palermo per me è l'eccellenza non soltanto in Italia, però in tutta l'area legale. Non si sente tanto agli Stati Uniti, però nell'ambito europeo. E l'Università di Palermo è veramente un leading group. And if we talk, I switch over to English, I'm sorry. If we talk about fighting transnational organized crime, I mean, it's not by chance that the Palermo Convention was signed there. So it is really my pleasure and my honor to share this afternoon with you. And first of all, thank you. I thank you for the invitation. I thank you for allowing me to share, not con I cannoli siciliani e con la città bellissima da voi. On the screen, it's the second best option, and we shouldn't complain about it. I hope in the next future we will regain and resume our meeting. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor. And first of all, my apologies. As Professor Militello already mentioned, I had just a Dubai flight to fly back to Madrid, and the flight is not direct, so I have to take a train in 15 minutes. So I decided just to make a presentation on the topic I had been really preparing and studying, and a topic which was at the beginning not so much my preferred one. And then I realized that it's amazing. It's amazing, like all other topics related to preventing and combating environmental crime, environmental issues. So I'm afraid the recording took a little bit too long and longer than I would have expected. And as I didn't know what kind of audience it was, I now see that there are specialists in environmental crime, so for them might be a little bit too, I would say, low level. But I thought it was interesting. For me, it was quite a discovery to find out not all the regulations there are about environmental crime, which is an amazing but huge topic, but also with regard to hazardous illegal transports. So why is this topic? And I think you really made a really good choice introducing this regarding to eco-mafia. You live it and you have it probably closer than me, because in so many reports I've read, the situation of Italy. Italy is one of the most important transit countries for illegal transport, illegal shipment of hazardous waste. And obviously this topic is so much connected. It's a type of crime that is profit-led, that is really follows the same methods and the same networks as other types of organized crime. So I've decided to focus not so much on how to fight organized crime, because you had already a series of workshops and seminars before. And I think it's the continuous challenge in improving the cooperation and the criminal investigation, whistleblowers, witness protection, and all kinds of measures to dismantle transnational organized crime, which I think was not the topic of today's presentation. So my presentation of today, the recording you will see right now, is quite limited in scope. So I only tried to show the audience the magnitude of the problem. So some figures and some information that might not be, of course, it's available to all of you, but you might not have had the time to focus on it. Second, the concepts. When we talk about waste, we all understand what is waste. Hazardous waste, there is an ongoing discussion since the 80s about what is the concept of hazardous waste and what shall be the treatment, the management, the disposal, and the requirements for it. And finally, a slight glimpse about the legal framework and the European landscape. And where does this European directives and regulations come from, which is from the Basel Convention of 1989. So finally, you will see on the presentation, I just point out a glimpse on the challenges and the challenges of combating this type of crime. And the first one, just allow me to start with one of the conclusions, is raising awareness and being involved, we all as citizens, in also changing the shift from what I call, and it's called usually dirty economy, towards a, so to say, circular and more green economy. And someone is telling me we should be leaving. So just to leave you with the recording, I'm so sorry we cannot enter discussion. I'm so sorry, and when I talk to a screen without any faces, I tend to be a little bit more sluggy. So you are perfectly allowed to disconnect if it tends to be a little too slow or too boring. I tried just to share what I have experienced with when I deepened and got more in depth in this topic, which is, at the beginning, I'm not interested in waste. I'm not interested in waste disposal. And the more I got into the topic, I said, no, this is a topic and a problem. We all have to not only get passionate about it, but really be implicated in fighting this type of very serious environmental crime. The situations that you find in third world countries are so horrendous, and due to the pandemic, even if there are no accurate and updated data, what has caused also the sanitary disposal in illegal transporting from all the materials in the COVID-19 crisis. It's an ongoing, increasing, growing, and it appears in Europe we are doing a lot, but still the efforts are very, very low. So this is my message today. Just let me involve you, and I hope it's not too boring, and I hope really we can resume in the future to really discuss. So thank you very much. And it starts with a little video of Interpol just to put you into the topic. And I hope you can really connect and upload the video. A presto, grazie tantissime.
Grazie a te per questa capacità di essere presente nonostante che sei in partenza. Ci tenevo a vederti ed è stata un'occasione. Grazie doppiamente allora. Alla prossima. Noi continuiamo a sentire. Tu puoi spegnere il video, Lorena, ci sentiamo poi con calma e chiedo appunto a non so chi delle valentissime collaboratrici di fare partire la lezione, l'intervento pre-caricato ieri sera da Lorena, visto che la professoressa Bachmaier, visto che doveva partire. Grazie.
Grazie.
Ciao. Era un collaboratore, professore.
Resto a vedere si comincia.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to share this presentation, this seminar with you. And thank you again for the invitation to Professor Militello and the University of Palermo And I will try to share some thoughts about these problems on the illegal shipment and of hazardous waste around the Mediterranean. Let me start with sharing with you a little presentation. I mean, it's not a presentation of mine, and I got it from YouTube, but I think it's an interesting introduction for you just to get into the topic of hazardous waste. Before we try to explain what is the role of the European Union in how to combat this new type or increasingly concerning crime, especially around the Mediterranean. So let me share with you a few minutes with a little introduction. It's an video done by Interpol, and I'll leave it with you.
Fancy winning a summer holiday? Sun, sea, sand. Come swim in these beautiful seas. Among the plastic waste, our planet is being polluted by criminals. Oil and garbage are being illegally dumped to avoid disposal fees. Organized crime groups are trafficking all types of waste, ditching it on land and at sea. Why? Because it makes big money. Almost as lucrative as drug trafficking. So what are we doing about it? At Interpol, we have an environmental security program which works with police forces and agencies in almost 200 member countries to help them prevent, detect, and disrupt pollution crimes, dismantling the criminal groups behind them. We run intelligence-led global operations with increased checks at land, sea, rivers, and ports. Member countries issue Interpol notices on waste trafficking and pollution crime-related offenses, and we respond to their requests for assistance, in particular with transnational crime cases. As for the pollution crime offenders, when we run their names through our databases, we often find the same names linked to other crimes. Money laundering, tax evasion, fraud. It's all the same criminals. Environmental crime is a crime that impacts on all of us. That's why Interpol is so invested in fighting it. Interpol, linking forces of nature.
So this short introduction, even if it's of Interpol, and we are focusing today on the European Union rules and regulations, I think it is interesting because it underlines very well in a very short time and in a very impressive way how shipment of waste and pollution in general is so much linked to the organized crime. They find the same criminals, they find and investigate the same criminal organizations because they use similar methods and similar patterns. So before I delve into the topic, I want also to share with you a slides presentation I have prepared on the topic of today. So I hope you find it entertaining. I'm sorry I cannot take your questions, but I hope you find it interesting. If not getting into all the details, because it's a huge topic, environmental crime, and especially also the transport, the shipment of hazardous waste. I think my aim today is perhaps just to for you to gain attention to this problem, which is sometimes not so much taken seriously because we don't know so much of it. And we focus more on drug dealing and human trafficking. And this is so much connected and has such a huge impact on our health, our planet, and obviously the whole environment. And second, not only raising aware of these problems, but also try to give you an overview of the complexity of the treatment of waste and hazardous waste and the different rules and regulations at the European Union level, which sometimes are not consistent at all. And finally, my aim is just to point out some of the shortcomings that might be detected, and we should think further about them. So some figures before we enter into it. Although everyone is nowadays aware of the importance of climate change, planet warming, earth warming, and of course any kind of environmental crime and threats, and some figures I found interesting in The Guardian, they were published on The Guardian, based on a report prepared and tracing back the disposal of electronic waste. They just put some chips in some computers that were to be recycled as electronic waste in the UK. And they found out, tracing back these chips introduced in the computers, that around 10% of them ended up in illegal shipments and ended up in being dumped in third world countries. In this case, it was in Nigeria. So around this report, The Guardian published these figures. They estimated around 352,474 metric tons only on electronic waste, which is being illegally shipped from the European Union to developing countries each year. Although it is absolutely prohibited by European Union regulation, as well as by the Basel Convention, as we will see later. And they make a self-criticism because they recognize that the UK is the worst offender in Europe for illegally exporting toxic electronic waste to developing countries. According to that investigation that tracked back shipments from 10 European countries. The director of the Basel Action Network said on these illegal shipments that they, at the end, it was a kind of form of domination on, I wouldn't use the word colonization, but exploitation, because it puts the waste management regime on the backs of the poor and vulnerable. If we take into account the most illegal shipments that cross the Mediterranean and end up in Africa and in Asia, we have to be very much aware that this is obviously an issue of poverty and vulnerable societies, regimes that are not able to tackle with these environmental issues. And what they say around the electronic scrap to vulnerable populations can be applicable to all kinds of hazardous waste. And this is a major business. It's the driver is obviously, it's a profit-led crime. And if we consider the amount of shipments that involve waste, we can already see what kind of the amount of business, the huge business that it's behind. So around 15% of all shipments within the European Union involve waste. And obviously not all of them are hazardous waste. Out of those, they consider around 10% to 15% hazardous waste, at least notified hazardous waste. In 2016, 3.1 million tons of plastic waste were exported from the European Union to non-OECD countries. Plastic is not considered in all rules and regulations as hazardous waste, but it's sometimes labeled as green waste. But it's producing a huge amount of environmental problems and obviously health issues. We will see that there is a big business and huge pollution causing in China. although China has lately rejected to accept any more imports of plastic waste coming from the European Union. Another figure, I think it's really impressive. In 2017, around 2.5 million tons notified hazardous shipments were moved around Europe, mainly between member states of the European Union. And as I told you before, it's around 10% of the total hazardous waste generated in the European Union. And this moves around the different member states, which means that the regulations of the European Union are working quite well, because at the end, most of the hazardous waste is disposed and recovered, treated, managed, according to the proximity principle. So it is treated where it is generated. Still, 10% is exported. It's prohibited to export it out of the European Union or OECD member states, so Organization for the Economy and Cooperation and Development States. And this would be the amount, the figures of the legal shipments. What about the illegal shipments? The illegal shipments, we don't know the figures exactly. Let's start figures like with other type of criminality, organized crimes. And what we know is about increasing detection and a huge deterrence, which is included in the European Union regulation, which is the obligation to repatriation and cleanup of the hazardous waste illegal shipments, obviously if detected. And I cite here, I quote here an example I found interesting of 2013, where hazardous waste was destined, shipped for Nigeria, and once discovered and reported and the liable entity identified, it had to be brought back to the port of Rotterdam. And obviously repatriation costs a lot of money. And in total, this reported illegal shipment costed amount 1.2 million. The issue is, of course, not the measures, sanctions, and deterrence effects, but the level of implementation. In general, shipment of hazardous waste is not only a problem of dumping in soil in third world countries or developing countries, but it's also entailing huge risks of leaks in pollution, marine pollution. I put here a picture of marine pollution, which is a major problem also within the Mediterranean, but it's still considered a low risk crime because there are no direct victims. Environment is such a crime that it's not easy to identify the directly affected persons. Of course, everyone is affected because it's a common good, no? But as direct victims are not always involved. And there was always the tendency and the trend to consider it was not a priority. This picture, I found it interesting because it shows how so much waste is, I would say, hazardous waste is shipped to Asia and Asian countries and causing, obviously, enormous health problems in those destiny countries. We could say that, and that's absolutely recognized in every report I've been reading, that developed countries are the exporter ones, the producers, and underdeveloped or in developing countries are the ones who are importers and then receiving them. These hazardous waste, toxic elements, dangerous for their health and obviously for their environment and their growth. But since this might be a huge business, not only for the traders, not only for the shippers, but also for the receiving countries, being paid sometimes through corrupt governments a huge amount of money, it's still occurring despite the bans. So, as I told you, waste trafficking originates mainly in developed countries. And at the top, we are finding European Union, North America, including Canada, Japan, and Australia being the exporters of illegal waste. And the main destination countries, and this is data from the United Nations report on 2017 and published in 2019, is Asia. In Asia are Indonesia, India, Malaysia, Pakistan, and Vietnam, the most important countries. And on the type of waste, e-waste, so electronic waste, usually is shipped to Southeast Asia, and used car parts and end-of-life vehicles to Eastern Europe and Africa. And plastic is was mainly up to 2017 sent illegally shipped to China. Italy plays a major role in all these illegal shipments. Not only Balkan countries are very much involved within the European Union, but the big ports are always involved in those ports, which are controlled by institutionalized corruption, or where mafia-type organizations are more active, of course, have more chances to be involved also in illegal shipments of hazardous waste. And Italy has proved to be one of the major transit countries for this kind of illegal exports. It was for a long time also an area, as you very well know, because I'm talking here to Italian audience. Around Naples, it is very well known that the Camorra was involved in the illegal disposal of these very toxic wastes. And let's come now to the legal framework, because we are lawyers and we try to find solutions within the legal framework. And what is the legal basis? The main legal basis is the Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movements of hazardous wastes. Well, this Basel Convention was signed in March 1989. Now there are 187 parties that are members of this Global Environmental Agreement on Hazardous Waste and Other Waste Convention. And its main objectives are the reduction of the production of hazardous waste, so try to improve the circular economy, and reduction of the movement. So again, we come to the proximity principle, that those that generate this hazardous waste also treat them and recover it. And the third objective is to improve the safety, the sound and handling of the hazardous waste, so that it doesn't create any problems for health and environment. And obviously a strict controlling of the waste trade, so that there is a notification from the exporting country, and only upon prior informed consent of the importing country that shipment could take place. So this Basel Convention was amended in 1995, just to introduce a strict ban, a strict prohibition to export hazardous waste without a control for recovery of those hazardous waste. So if you look at the time it was adopted, 1995, it has taken quite a long time since it has entered into force, which was 5th December 2019. So there is still very few experience on the implementation and application of the new rules of the Basel Convention upon this more strict prohibition on the export of hazardous waste. So mainly for European Union, it means that member states cannot export hazardous waste out of states of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and the European Union. So that hazardous waste needs to be kept within European Union or one member state of the OECD and Liechtenstein. So no other countries will be receiving countries of hazardous waste. A number of parties that have signed already on the amendment, the ban amendment, are 100. Let's see what will be its implementation. In the meantime, complementing also the Basel Convention, African countries promoted the Bamako Convention, so that there was a ban for importing into Africa hazardous wastes. And it was this Bamako Convention is kind of an improvement of the Basel Convention with regard to more controls in the prior informed consent of the African countries with regard to the acceptance and shipment of hazardous wastes. Of course, we are talking about compliance of conventions and compliance of rules. Within the European Union, the main regulation on shipments of waste is this regulation 1013 of 2006, which again prohibits, except to the EFTA countries, the export of all kinds of waste which is destined for disposal. If it's not destined for recovery, it cannot be exported to no country except to EFTA. And in the Basel Convention, now we come to, because we have been talking a little bit on the introduction of the rules and the main conventional United Convention of Basel conventional rules. But when we are talking about waste and hazardous waste, what are we talking about? So we have, let me go back to the definitions. And this definition is to be found in the Basel Convention of 1989. And waste, it's a very broad definition. No substances or objects which are disposed of, or are intended to be disposed of, or are required to be disposed of by the provisions of national law. This provision applied to hazardous and other wastes. So everything, more or less, substances and objects that need to be disposed of, and which is very general. And when we talk about movement and cross-border movement, transboundary movement of any hazardous wastes or other wastes from one state to another national jurisdiction of another state, or to or through an area not under the national jurisdiction of any state. So cross-border transport, even if it's not the destiny of the disposal or the recovery or the treatment of hazardous waste. And now we come to the definition of hazardous waste, which I here quote Article 1.4 of the Council Directive on Hazardous Waste that dates back to 1991. And it says it's waste which must contain, and there it refers to Annex 3 of the directive, which lists all the types of substances and objects that are considered hazardous waste, and I would say coming from animals, sanitary, metals, chemicals, and so forth. And it's a very, very, very long list. And what is special for this hazardous waste is that they require special handling and transport, as well as special treatment and disposal in order to avoid its risky and adverse effects on human health and environment. And the properties of the waste, which render it hazardous, are these ones I'm listing there: explosivity, reactivity, flammability, irritability, harmfulness, toxicity, and all these other, I would say, viticity, teratogenicity, mutagenicity, and all other toxic substances. So any kind of substance, an object that might be harmful for the health or the environment, causing any kind of risk of explosives, radioactivity, inflammation, but also any kind of other risks for the health or environment. So all these types of waste, they are created and generated enormously in huge amounts in developed countries. If disposed or shipped in an illegal way, they will constitute an environmental crime. And there are very many different of what is called waste crimes. Waste crime may result from acts or omission that harm the environment or avoidance of protective measures, and take many forms. So you see illegal waste sites, illegal burning of fly tipping, misclassification and fraud. And we're dealing today only with the last one, which is illegal shipment of waste and hazardous waste. And now we come to the regulation. It starts back with the directive of 84, which was already implementing and controls and monitoring on transfrontier shipment of hazardous waste, which was amended later in 86, increasing the monitoring measures for exports. And the definition in the directive of 91 on hazardous waste. What is hazardous waste? I recommend you just to have a look on this directive, and then which complemented the previous one on general waste. And we come on, we go through the general waste framework waste directive of 2008. But regarding to shipments of waste, the main regulation currently in force is the 1013 of 2006, which I already mentioned. And with regard to hazardous waste illegal shipments, we find that in the General Criminal Environment Directive of 2008, it requires from the member states to ensure this directive doesn't create new types of crimes, environmental crimes, but requires from the member states to ensure that shipment of hazardous waste constitutes a criminal offense. This is enshrined in Article 3.c, and also the member states shall provide for criminal liability by legal persons for these type of infringements, criminal offenses. So this would be the general European Union framework. If we go to the what is going on, and having a look at the Europol prepared report, the last one of 2021 on the what is called the SOCTA assessment, serious and organized crime threat assessment, they already mentioned since 2017 that waste trafficking is a priority in the overall policy against organized crime, and is defined as a priority for the period 2018-2021. If we take into account that it's firstly identified as a priority in 2017, and it is still recognized as a major concern within illegal traffic of goods and organized criminality in 2021, we still don't know exactly what has been done or not, because in their report, it only states again, this is an increasing area, organized crime networks and methods are involved, and the same, so to say, the same measures and methods fighting organized crime or other mafia time criminality should be employed in tackling hazardous waste, illegal shipments. But again, the data are difficult to obtain and are not reflected clearly in these reports. There are other sources of information, but the last one is this IMPL report. IMPL is the European Union Network for the Implementation and Enforcement of Environmental Law. And they elaborated in 2015 this transport shipment waste regulation report, and they already pointed out on the need to provide for more statistics and raise awareness. And the last, not the last, there is a very interesting report I just pointed out, if you have time to look into it, on this staff working document evaluation of 2006 on shipments of waste, and later the evaluation that has also produced the European Union Commission that was published in 2020 on the implementation and impact assessment of the hazardous waste shipment regulation, well, the waste shipment regulation of 2006 and its impact related to hazardous shipments, hazardous waste shipments. And there is another very interesting report on intelligence project on environmental crime, but dating back to 2015. So I don't know how far it could be updated, but it already points out that there is a major shortcoming, that there is no coordinated action against this type of crimes and illegal hazardous waste shipments. And according to the responses received during the interviews and the questionnaires done by this Envy Crime Net's report study, the respondents said that they feel that there is no network of contact points to exchange intelligence and information between the different law enforcement and also non-law enforcement institutions regarding this type of crime. In particular, the waste industry is seen as an interconnected global industry, and the trafficking of illicit waste has to be identified both. Europol and Interpol is one of the key crime areas exploited by organized crime at the international level. So there's a myriad of shell companies and complex legal person structures just to collect, transport, and illegally dispose, and obviously transport the hazardous waste that is creating serious risk for really the health, I would say, of the whole planet. But as long as they are dumping most of this hazardous waste in developing countries, they are really destroying the capacity of them to grow in a sustainable way. So what they point out is that there is a need for intelligence-led policies. So let me finish, because we only have 30 minutes and this connection cannot last longer than 35 minutes. I would love to discuss with you and listen to your questions, because in this very short time, it's really impossible to reflect what is needed to be done and what should be done in order not only to identify, detect, and investigate these crimes, but also to prosecute them effectively. The conclusions that can be traced out of this, of the SOCTA report, the Impel report, the intelligence report I just cited, is that, of course, the rules as they are right now, with the Basel Convention and the different protocols and annexes introduced to the Basel Convention, and now that is being enforced since 2019, the ban amendment, might be enough. This complemented with the myriad of regulations in the European Union level, because I only cited those related precisely to shipment, waste, and hazardous waste. But there is a directive on waste on electrical and electronic equipment, 2012, on batteries and accumulators of 2006, and end-of-life vehicles of 2000, packaging and packaging waste of 94, the Industrial Emissions Directive of 2010, the Landfill Directive of 1991, and so on. So there are rules and legal framework on waste, disposal of waste, treatment of waste, recovery of waste, recycling of waste, sanctions, the principle of the polluter pays. It's to my humble consideration, there is enough regulation already on storage, transport, disposal, and recycling of waste, and as well on since 2006 on the shipment. But there is need for a more effective implementation of these rules, because either because there's lack of political will, there's lack of capacity, institutional capacity, there's lack of resources, there's lack of personnel, or there's lack of interest in, at the end, these type of very profitable crimes go largely unpunished. And what all stakeholders claim is that there should be more coordination among the different institutions involved, because there's a complex of institutions that are all playing a different role, but the information is not adequately shared among them. And customs have their own information and their own way of dealing with it. But sometimes the information is not shared with the public prosecutors, with tax authorities, with port authorities, and with intelligence. So a systematic, coordinated approach among all the institutions, first at the national level, second at the supranational level, is needed to tackle this type of transnational crime, transnational, I would say, victims, and very complex financial structures and corporate structures to just put a shield to the effective investigation of the criminals. So this requires not only the institutions involved to be very well coordinated and share intelligence and information, but also a multi-level crime prosecution, like in any other organized crime, profit-led organized crime, and transnational organized crime, because these type of crimes cannot be successful if we don't act in parallel against institutional corruption. And obviously chasing the money is always the most effective way. Therefore, common action against money laundering, tax evasion, And obviously, corruption needs to be done in order to prevent and prosecute illegal shipment of hazardous waste. And of course, being absolutely important to improve the international cooperation, because mainly what we see of illegal exports coming out from the European Union, as I pointed out before, the importers, so the destiny countries, are mainly out of the European Union. So we are dealing with a cross-border criminality, and this needs international cooperation, because the ones who generate and cause and take profit out of it are mainly not in the destiny countries. But the destiny country has to be involved in order to gather and collect the evidence, and also to combat the local corruption there. So, and this is specifically visible and absolutely needed when we deal with the transport and disposal of hazardous waste. The last point that has been pointed out in most reports is that drones and big data surveillance through the Copernicus program, which is employed in the controlling of the common agriculture policy, in observing and surveilling all the crops. Some IT surveillance at the satellite level should be implemented in order to prevent and control these illegal shipments. So the message, my last message, is obviously institutional capacity, resources, political will of fighting corruption, all what you know already from combating and other types of organized crime should be in place here too. Legal framework is adequate. Sometimes it's overlapping and not consistent. Because there's so much rules, and for example, hazardous waste, and for nuclear waste, there's another regulation, and there's sometimes an overlap with shipment of non-hazardous waste and so forth. No? But I think this is not the major problem, and major problem is really coordination and applying deeply and effectively the deterrence effect. And to that, I think we, all the citizens, have to be more aware, more involved, more engaged in a passive and active way. So I would say requesting from our states to take this very seriously, not because the victims, so to say, are back in some far country in Africa, is less important. And I would end this message with my personal view. My personal view is that we should really move towards a more circular economy and try to prevent in our own consume patterns do not contribute to this type of dirty economy. So creating hazardous waste and promoting organized crime to make profit out of it. So I thank you for your attention, and I leave you right now with this recorded presentation. And sorry for not being in person, and sorry for not being able to address your questions and the absolutely it is interesting discussion that would follow. Thank you very much.
Molto bene. Entriamo, c'è un po' di eco. Ecco, grazie. Vedo che si è collegata anche la professoressa Paola Maggio, la saluto e sono molto lieto di aver trovato con la professoressa Lorena Bachmaier questa modalità mista, al contrario di sua presenza qui, prima contemporaneamente presente, poi si è dovuta allontanare proprio per la dimensione in cui si è trovata di dover partire per rientrare a Madrid dalla madre che ha avuto un problema medico. Abbiamo sentito il suo intervento e, come sempre faccio in questi casi, cerco di sintetizzare, naturalmente in termini assolutamente essenziali, il senso, il filo conduttore del suo ragionamento, soprattutto a vantaggio degli studenti che partecipano a questo seminario. La struttura della sua relazione è un modello di costruzione di una relazione in un seminario, perché con assoluto rigore ha diviso la sua struttura sostanzialmente in 4 parti, in un'introduzione più orientata alla dimensione empirico-criminologica, anche molto variegata, tratta da spunti di carattere anche giornalistico, quindi con un aggancio alla realtà per dare la dimensione della concretezza dei problemi trattati, facendo appunto riferimento anche all'impegno che una realtà come quella di Europol ha destinato, l'impegno che ha rivolto a questo versante. In questa prospettiva segnalo anche un elemento molto interessante anche per me, perché poi più avanti ha richiamato la recentissima pubblicazione del SOCTA, che è appunto un rapporto che periodicamente Europol pubblica sulla presenza e sulle forme di manifestazione del crimine organizzato in Europa. Si tratta di un documento di notevole importanza per avere una radiografia delle problematiche che le organizzazioni criminali nei vari contesti europei, dell'Unione Europea, di volta in volta, cioè ogni nuova edizione, manifestano. Peraltro ha precedenti importanti nello studio e nella rilevazione delle manifestazioni della criminalità organizzata in una situazione precedente alla Convenzione ONU di Palermo del 2000, quindi rappresenta una fonte molto utile per fare raffronti non solo fra i vari paesi dell'Unione Europea, ma anche dal punto di vista storico, diacronico, come nei vari paesi le varie manifestazioni si sono nel corso degli anni sviluppate. Ebbene, in questa fonte il riferimento in generale ai crimini ambientali e al trattamento dei rifiuti segnala che la dimensione lucrativa di questo tipo di traffici è certamente un elemento in rilevante crescita e per le caratteristiche stesse l'Unione Europea si colloca in quello scenario dei paesi avanzati, ricchi potremmo dire, produttori di sostanze ambientalmente inquinanti e quindi rifiuti. Ed è interessante notare il fatto che uno degli elementi strutturali dei traffici illeciti che abbiamo notato quando abbiamo parlato di altri tipi di traffici illeciti nel Mediterraneo, mi riferisco essenzialmente alle tematiche del primo gruppo di seminari, quello in cui abbiamo trattato i problemi dell'immigrazione clandestina e della tratta di esseri umani. È interessante notare come queste rotte che avevamo studiato, abbiamo considerato quando parlavamo di quel tipo di beni, tra virgolette, cioè le persone, gli esseri umani trafficati, hanno direzioni diverse quando invece si parla di rifiuti, dove appunto la direttrice è dai paesi ricchi ai paesi poveri. Quindi noi importiamo sostanzialmente persone ed esportiamo rifiuti. Questo è un elemento, secondo me, di notevole interesse nella logica che noi stiamo perseguendo di riflettere sul significato dei traffici illeciti di beni e di persone. Il secondo blocco tematico che la professoressa Lorena Bachmaier-Winter ha trattato è lo straordinariamente ricco quadro normativo multilivello che su queste tematiche si incrocia. Quando io, mi capita spesso, parlo della Convenzione di Palermo, faccio riferimento al grande successo che a livello internazionale la Convenzione di Palermo in circa 20 anni ha acquisito per il numero molto elevato di paesi che hanno aderito alla convenzione e hanno implementato la stessa, sia pure in maniera molto articolata. Ebbene, la Convenzione di Basel dell'Unione Europea ha avuto, in materia di rifiuti pericolosi, ha avuto un numero di adesioni pari, 187 sono state indicate come stati membri di questa convenzione. Questo è sicuramente un elemento molto significativo, così come il successivo emendamento che espressamente nel quadro più generale della trattazione dei beni ambientali della Convenzione di Basel ha riguardato, diciamo, il bando dei rifiuti pericolosi, e invece è estremamente interessante notare che è stato approvato a livello dell'organizzazione internazionale nel 95 e che per trovare applicazione, anzi per entrare in vigore, perché come sapete negli strumenti internazionali l'entrata in vigore è posposta al raggiungimento di un certo numero di adesioni, c'è stato un periodo di gestazione estremamente prolungato nel tempo, dal 1995 al 2019, quindi appena ieri per così dire. Nonostante che il protocollo riguardi un numero di paesi di circa la metà, perché da quello che sentivamo interessa circa 100 paesi. Bene, questo è un ulteriore elemento che mi ha fatto molto riflettere. Più velocemente vado su le ultime parti naturalmente poi il quadro normativo è stato ulteriormente illustrato con gli strumenti, li avete visti elencati dell'Unione Europea, non voglio soffermarmi, e in questa logica, oltre appunto a quel documento importante SOCTA di cui appunto ci ha comunicato la recente pubblicazione, quello precedente era abbastanza risalente, quindi questa fonte lo segnalo ai molti studiosi giovani presenti, può essere una fonte di approfondimento per coloro che nei rispettivi ambiti di ricerca volessero appunto aggiornare le proprie fonti. Dicevo appunto, molto interessante è stato quel riferimento a un progetto del 2015 che mi sembra molto innovativo dal punto di vista proprio della concezione della cooperazione in questo settore. Anche questo, diciamo, è uno spunto che potrebbe essere utilmente approfondito. Visto che siete oramai in periodo di preparazione delle rispettive tesine, sarebbe interessante che piuttosto che parlare in generale di tutti i rifiuti illeciti che vengono trafficati nel Mediterraneo, ci fosse una tesina che approfondisce uno di questi documenti e dopo una brevissima introduzione generale, ne come dire, studia tutti i risvolti, cercando di appunto vederne i significati innovativi. Molto ampie, di ampio respiro, sono le considerazioni finali, in cui la natura transnazionale delle reti che gestiscono questo traffico inevitabilmente incrocia le tematiche che trattiamo oggi con altri tipi di reati scopo delle organizzazioni criminali, essenzialmente la corruzione. Sotto questo profilo mi sembra molto interessante il dato che è emerso in corso d'opera. Il nostro quadro dei seminari era già stato fissato, ma poco tempo fa, all'inizio di aprile, è uscita un'ampia copertina del settimanale L'Internazionale, dedicato proprio a un caso di traffici illeciti di rifiuti tra l'Italia e la Tunisia, che appunto nel segnalare la destinazione dei rifiuti dall'Italia verso la Tunisia avvenuto pochissimo tempo fa, già in pieno lockdown, maggio del 20 dell'anno scorso, ha segnalato appunto come la realizzazione di questi spostamenti di container molto numerosi, stiamo parlando di un totale di 7.900 tonnellate di spazzatura che partivano dalla Campania e sono arrivati al porto di Sousse in Tunisia, circa 100 chilometri sulla costa orientale della Tunisia. Ebbene, questo traffico non è solo un traffico di rifiuti illeciti, ma è fortemente intrecciato a fatti di corruzione dei funzionari rispettivamente coinvolti sia sul versante italiano che sul versante tunisino. Quindi quella interazione tra diverse forme di reati scopo tipica della criminalità contemporanea organizzata è proprio comprovata da questo evento che come dire, mi ha confortato del fatto che non parlavamo di cose astratte ma di realtà che parallelamente al nostro studiare avvengono. Mi fa molto piacere avere constatato che le fotografie di questo bel servizio dell'Internazionale, che dà appunto la copertina all'Internazionale, sono, non vi voglio stupire, ma del fotografo che noi abbiamo avuto la possibilità di conoscere, Francesco Bellina, il fotografo palermitano che ci ha fatto vedere i suoi scatti sulla tratta dei lager in Libia. Direi che come pennellate di questo ampio, poi penso che Simona e Cristina, che non hanno caricato e fatto circolare il video, perché è stato Riccardo a farlo circolare. Io cerco, diciamo, di supportare la parità di genere, ma questa volta, diciamo, sono stato smentito dai fatti, è stato Riccardo a farlo circolare, quindi onore anche a Riccardo che ci è riuscito. Però credo che Simona e Cristina caricheranno la presentazione della professoressa Bachmaier, la potete avere tranquillamente. Adesso, secondo le tradizioni migliori, noi facciamo una breve pausa e poi inizieremo fra esattamente 10 minuti e 25 con la relazione, con l'intervento della dottoressa Claudia Ferrari, sostituto procuratore della Repubblica qui a Palermo. Direi appunto che possiamo presentarla alla ripresa e quindi mi fermo qui, vi auguro di prendere un ricco caffè dopo la mia più ampliamento dei temi che sintesi. Me ne scuso, ma insomma ognuno ha la propria reattività a quello che si sente e quindi ci vediamo fra 10 minuti.